I mean, I've done hundreds of shows, but if someone asks me, "Oh, what sort of stuff have you done?" I always say Mythbusters, and the reaction is always, without exception, just like, "Really? You did Mythbusters?"
Anthony, welcome to Try This at Home. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
We are so excited. We were talking before we started recording that obviously our audience heard us talk to Andrew Farrell a few months ago, and as soon as he came on and we were talking kind of behind the scenes, he was like, hey, if you want to talk to behind the scenes people, you got to get to Anthony. So I'm really excited to actually have you on and get to hear about your memories of Mythbusters.
Well, thanks. You really dumped me in it. I appreciate that.
Yeah. If you don't enjoy this, blame him.
Yes. Oh, I will. Don't worry.
Well, before we actually get into the Mythbusters part of it, I'm sure our audience would love to hear, and we would as well. What got you into television and on this career path that you are still on to this day?
Well, Andrew and I sort of have known each other, I guess, more than half our lives, and we both met as cub reporters working at a television station in regional New South Wales, Australia. And we were very young, we were 20, I think. And back in those days, I mean, I don't think those opportunities exist anymore. So we were, learning on the job. We were, in a day you could be, at the local court covering something, and then you'd be straight off to the local sports ground to do a sports story. You were doing colour stories. You were doing, local council political stuff. So we were TV journalists. So I'm trained as a journalist originally, and then basically stepped my way through. And I was on camera, obviously, and long story short, I got an amazing opportunity when I was about, I think I was 22, to join a show called Beyond 2000, which was a big science and technology show here in Australia, which I believe also made it to the States on cable. And so suddenly I'd sort of left the world of news behind, and I was doing sort of longer form science, traveling the world, doing crazy science stuff, which was vastly amusing because I'm the least scientific person I know. But they assured me that's what they wanted. They wanted someone who'd just rock up and go, huh? so I guess it sort of worked. But so that's how I got into sort of longer form documentary style TV, and I've sort of remained in that to this very day, on and off. Yeah.
They often say that writers are drawn to TV because TV is a writer's medium in a lot of ways. Do you find that's true in the reality docu side as well?
Yes and no. I think less so these days. Back when, during the Mythbusters era, of course, a TV show needed to be written, whereas very rarely these days do I make a show where I have to sit down and actually write a script. It's there seems to be an almost anaphylactic reaction to voiceover these days, and I understand that. And I mean, so you're still telling, obviously using your storytelling chops, but you're not, sitting down trying to link one thing to another with a nice power of voiceover, But yeah, I mean, originally, definitely, it was all about the writing, especially something like Mythbusters.
In the Mythbusters era, could you explain, just for our audience's benefit, of kind of what a writer on a show like that does? Because I think it's a much bigger role than people probably expect. They think of you're just writing VO, but it's actually a lot bigger than that too.
Yeah, well, it's post-producing, and I guess your listeners, your fans would know about that. So the responsibility you have is basically, so as you obviously know, like, the guys in front of the camera on Mythbusters were all American, but nearly everyone off camera is Australian. And so I'd be sitting here in Oz, and they'd send back the rushes from whatever shoot, and they'd tell me, you've got this story, and this story. We've slated, that it's going to be episode whatever. And so back in the day, like when I started, which was 2003 or whatever it was, that the rushes turned up at VHS tapes. And a box would be delivered to my house, and it literally like stacked along the wall of my office with like 150 VHS tapes that I had to literally sit and just patiently go through and write notes and write time code and, oh, that's a good bit or that's a funny bit. And heaven help you if you forgot something, you know what I mean? Like, what tape was that? What was that? I'm sure I saw a bit where he said something, and where's that? But yeah, so we'd watch it, and then it was a case of sitting and doing a paper script. So you'd be sitting there and writing out the parts, the natural sound. Adam says blah blah to Jamie, and then line of VO that gets you from there to there. And when I think about it now, how things have changed, I mean, it seems so primitive, and I mean, you wonder how we ever got anything made at all, frankly.
Yeah.
But so the job is to sit there and literally piece it together like a jigsaw puzzle. I would then feed script as I was going to the editor I was working with, and they'd start putting it together, and I'd do the guide VO, and eventually we'd get the actual actor whose name it's Robert, isn't it?
Robert Lee, yeah.
That's right. I can't believe I've forgotten that. And so it was a massive job. I think it took something like 8-10 weeks to put together an episode. Wow. And you lived. And the funny thing was watching the Ancient Death Ray episode yesterday. It just it does come back to you. You just go, oh God, I remember sitting there writing that. Yeah, it was. Just when they say you're the writer, there's a lot more to it than that, basically.
Yeah. Wow. And for comparison, how long would you say if you were going to do a show like Mythbusters today? How long an episode might take?
I think it would maybe 6 to 8 weeks. It would still take a fair chunk of time. But it would just be, you'd just be on the Avid. You'd just be doing it all. It would be quicker. It'd be a different beast these days.
Yeah, a very different process, I'd imagine, too, in terms of how you're cultivating. That's amazing, though. It is like, I came up in the era of all digital editing and everything, so it just, when I watch Mythbusters, and something we've talked about a lot on the show, is just, there's so much. And the thought that it all ends up making it into whatever a 44-minute cut or whatever it was in America at that time, the cuts that we watch, it's an amazing undertaking. It's incredible just how much and that you also had a transcontinental workflow to make that happen. It's such an undertaking that you don't see TV like that anymore.
No, and that's right. I'd sort of forgotten that, but we'd have to send cuts at a certain point. The guys in Soundframe would watch it, obviously, and the executive producer was over there, and of course then we'd get notes back, and they'd be like, "Hey, what about the bit where I was?" Adam would be like, "What about the bit where I was really funny, where I did this?" And then it's like, "Oh, all right," and you'd go back and you'd change things, and of course, you'd just have facts wrong, and you'd have to, revisit and and then of course that was even before Discovery had seen it and the EP's there, and then there was another raft of notes and so on and so forth, and that as I say, it could drag on. I mean, the first one I ever did was episode 1, so the first episode was the Ice Bullet. So we'd had the 3 pilot episodes, and that first episode I thought I'd be doing it for my entire adult life, because the situation was I was hired, and I wasn't even living in Sydney at that stage. I was living up in Queensland, another state, and but they asked me to do it, and I was sort of fascinated by it, so I said yes. So I came to Sydney for the first one. I said, well, I'll come to Sydney for the duration. And I walked into the office. I'll never forget it. I walked into the office on day 1, and there was no one there. Every single person involved in the production was in San Francisco.
Wow.
And a batch of rushers had arrived, and I was literally standing there going, what do you want? What do you want me to do? What am I doing? And I remember talking to the EP, and it basically saying, what we want is we want it sort of like the three initial episodes, the pilot episodes, but not. We want it sharper, and we want more VO in it, and we want it quicker. And but literally that was the brief, and then it was just like,
Wow.
right. So and I do have a background, and I flatter myself that I have some sort of reputation of being mildly funny. And it was like, they said go to town on it, and so that's where it started. And it was just this bizarre thing of just being in a vacuum and going, all right, and away I went. And it was weeks and weeks. I mean, it was nearly 3 months, I think, before everyone was happy. And we finally
Wow.
settled on it and went, yeah, that's the tone. I mean, yeah, I went to town on the writing and we pulled some of that back. But I think that's where the voice of Mythbusters, I mean, the idea I had, if I could, to the extent it was a conscious decision at all, was try and make the narrator almost a third character who would bounce off, something might happen in the action and he would almost be talking to the Mythbusters on occasions. And I mean, as you know, even watching Death Ray yesterday, I mean, the amount of alliteration and puns, and I actually spent most of the time with my head in my hands going, oh my God. The thing was, I knew what was going to come. It was like, although it's been 20 odd years, something would happen in the skunk story, for instance, and I just knew what the next line was going to be because I'd probably write it today. And sure enough, there it was, yeah.
That is so interesting to hear because we talked about so much going back to the pilots when we started our rewatch. It felt like such a different show than obviously the show that we, had come to love over the years. And when we got to Ice Bullet, we went, "Oh, wait a minute. This is starting to feel like Mythbusters now." And so we felt this real change in voice, and that's you. that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, well, yeah, I hesitate to take that credit, but certainly it was. I mean, that was the brief. The brief was we sort of like that, but we need it to be slightly different. But, like TV so often is no one quite, I always say people never know what they want. They only know what they don't want. And so you just keep feeding them stuff and it's like, no, no, no. And then suddenly someone will go, yeah, I like that. And you go, oh, so that's what you wanted. And it was very strange because it wasn't that you were coming off nothing. We had 3 pilots, but it was just this thing, we wanted slightly different, but no one could quite put their finger on what it was that they did want. I mean, and then we refined it, of course, because, like we had another writer, a great guy and a great writer, Mark Barland, came in shortly after I'd started, and Martin Ives, and you had people like Andrew Farrell. And between them, they're all good writers. And so it's like they took the idea and ran with it, and we just kept developing this tone. It was almost like not mocking, but just having fun at sometimes at Adam and Jamie's expense, and I found once you hit on that, once you've got that sort of solid idea, then the rest sort of almost falls into place, if that makes sense.
Yeah. When we talked to Adam Savage at the end of our last season, we were asking him about some of the same stuff, and we were telling him how that point at which the show starts to become self-aware that Adam and Jamie are characters and that they're naturally funny to see them pit against each other. And he felt like in the production of it that he and Jamie got to a point where they said, "Oh, the writers like that. We're going to do more of it. And we're going to start kind of becoming these characters. It's really us, but we're just going to turn it up a little bit." How could you talk about that relationship of you're noticing what they're doing, they're noticing what you're doing, and you guys are kind of, again, without being in the same room, you're now shaping this whole vibe. How did that feel at the time?
Yeah, it was fairly organic. I don't think it was ever sort of front of mind, if you know what I mean. I mean, we'd sometimes talk to Adam and Jamie, but not often. I mean, and often it was about something technical. Like I'd be watching rushes and I literally did not understand what was happening. So I'd basically have to hook up and talk to Adam or Jamie and go, can you explain what should I be saying here? Because I don't know what's going on. But I don't recall ever having conversation with them about character as such. But I think you're right. I mean, they just, that was casting gold and you could try for the rest of, till the crack of doom and you wouldn't strike that combination. again, it was lightning in a bottle, and they were easy because they are characters. So it wasn't like we had to work at it. I mean, Jamie's Jamie, and you could go to town on Jamie's deadpan, and then Adam's craziness. So it was just there. But yes, I know that they did. They sort of hooked into what we were doing, and I can't think of an example, a solid example off the top of my head. But
Sure.
yeah, I guess we did have that sort of yin yang thing going, but it certainly wasn't as bold as like let's get around a table and discuss how we're going to accentuate your character or make you slightly larger than life or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, because I feel like nowadays there probably would be that meeting, and it would probably be like focus group to death of who are these characters? How is this going to work? They have to do X, Y, and Z. Part of what we've come to really appreciate about the show, rewatching it now, having worked in the field and whatever, is just, again, you don't get TV like this, where you get to see it being made and you get to see that organicness coming to life. And as an audience, you're following along with it, right? We're experiencing it at the same rate pretty much that you guys are in making the show. And so it's always funny. I feel like when I get to talk to someone like you who worked on the show, I feel like we have very similar experiences in terms of seeing that come to life. That's so unique in any kind of media, I feel like, these days.
Yeah, you're right. And can I just backtrack? And I jumped on and listened to the episode Try This at Home about the ice bullet. And I was really struck by, you guys had picked up on that the fact that suddenly we were in, it more or less felt like real Mythbusters.
Yeah.
And I was really struck that you noticed that. Because, I thought, wow, these guys are on the ball, because it's exactly what happens. Exactly what happened. But yeah, look, the thing, it did evolve. And it's like, I'll just give you the Australian experience. So for quite a while, people would ask you, what are you working on? And I'd say, the show Mythbusters is for Discovery in the US. And it was like, oh, okay. And then it got picked up by an Australian network. And it just exploded. It got this cult status here in Oz. Everyone was talking about Mythbusters, and for I kid you not, for probably 2 weeks, I did an interview with a radio station, TV or magazine, because no one could get their heads around that this was actually an Australian show. And it was like, well, the guy who writes it, one of the guys who writes it, is living around the corner, and so I had more fame as a guy who wrote Mythbusters than I ever had from being on air, like being a face.
Wow.
But it really took off. And I guess the point of that story is that, because I did probably the on and off like the first 5 seasons, and then I went away and I came back for the odd special. Like I came back and did a duct tape bridge. It was a one-off thing. They asked me to come back and do it, and I came back. And I did notice a change as I went away and came back. As that show got bigger, I mean, it won't surprise you to learn, everyone became more famous, and it was like, and because it was a success, there were so many people who wanted to have a finger in the pie. And I noticed that early days, it was like the early, on the range or, the frontier, we were just like carving this path. No one knew what we were doing. We're all just making it up as we go along. By the time I came back to it, it was this, suddenly it was Mythbusters, and everyone, I mean, I don't, of course everyone had an ego the whole way along, but I found it more difficult. I found it slightly more difficult. Everyone was so hyper aware of their own success. And I don't just mean, I'm not just talking about Adam and Jamie, I mean Discovery. I mean, suddenly everyone you worked with, there were so many more filters, and it was, do you know what I mean? Like in a strange way, it was like the edges had been sanded off it. And I'd have to be honest and say I didn't find it quite as much fun.
That kind of those rough edges that you talk about in the early days, we've talked a lot about how the closest thing I can compare in modern media to Mythbusters would be like YouTube content, right? Would be a show where there's a relationship between the audience and the show in a really direct way. That's something that we responded to so much with this new season. we just did the Myths Revisited episode, the very first Myths Revisited episode. And I can't think of another show of its type that was directly talking to the audience in the way that they were. You know, maybe a late night show or something like that, but that's a whole different ball of wax. But for them to go, no, you can email us and have something appear on the show, on this major Discovery Channel television show. There's nothing else like that at the time. Now we take it for granted. Now we go, of course, you know, you can reach out to a creator. You can send somebody
you tweet
a message.
at them.
Yeah, send them an Instagram message. But at the time, how were you guys feeling that feedback from the audience? How was that coming in back then?
Well, it came via San Fran. I mean, it wasn't feedback that we were getting directly here in Sydney. Well, I wasn't, but I mean, it gave us great content. It was fantastic. I mean, even the ancient Death Ray story, I believe, you know, things exploded after that. You've got fans writing in going, you did it wrong. And I mean, if nothing else, it gave us great content because we could go back and revisit myths. And, you know, that's the great thing was, okay, like apparently we missed something or whatever it was. We'll go and have another, we'll do it again for you. We'll have another crack at it. And I think that was a lovely symbiotic relationship with the audience, you know, to not ignore everyone and just present this show and move on. This idea that, yeah, you know, like, okay, well, maybe we got it wrong and we'll respond to you. And yeah, I think that. You're right. I mean, I can't think of another show that sort of does that, or certainly didn't do that at the time. Yeah.
It also makes it feel more scientific. You know, it's almost like it's being opened up to peer review when people can be like, well, actually, you could try this and introduce this control and X, Y, and Z.
Yeah,
although I could just imagine a very snotty tone in those emails. very pushing up the glasses. Well, you better believe me, mister. That ain't it.
Oh yeah. I'm sure there was a lot of that I heard. I mean, we were not incubated. What am I trying to say? I'm just a writer, don't you know? You know, we were protected from that over here.
Yeah,
we
insulated.
were very much not on the front line. You know, we were back in the chateau. Yeah. You know, and you know, we just hear. You know, we talk to the guys in San Fran. It was like, oh, that didn't go down well. And it was like, oh yes, we're being railed at here for, you know, not doing X, Y, or Z. So you know, we'll have another crack at it. You know, it was funny for us, but then we go, well, we know what the next episode's going to be, don't we? You know, it was like so. Yeah, but I mean, what's any show without the fans? I mean, you haven't got it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and fandom of any show these days, you know, it's. I often compare it to like loving a football team or you know, a sports team, and you show your love by just denigrating the people, the team, and going on and on about how bloody useless they all are.
It's true.
That's how people show their love, and I think, you know, but it's the same with any fandom. But hey, you know, if they're engaging, then that's what you want, right?
Absolutely. You mentioned Death Ray, which is the episode we just covered on the show that we absolutely loved. I'm so curious. You said when you and I were emailing, you said, I've got to watch this back because it's been a while. So having watched it recently for the first time in a while, what was that experience like of going back and revisiting that episode?
What scared me the most is how much I literally had forgotten. I mean, I was watching the show and I couldn't remember how it ended, like what happens. And I think, you know, maybe it's like childbirth and you just forget the pain and move on. I don't know. But, I mean, it was, I can't remember exactly what year that was, but I mean, it must be 20 years ago. And there's been a lot of water under a lot of bridges since then. And I've made, you know, hundreds more shows. But I tend to be like that. I with anything I'm doing, you know, I just, you know, it's done. Okay, everyone's happy. Okay, what's next? And I just immediately, you know, move on. But it's what struck me was some of my lines. I think I was cringing. So I guess to maybe I don't know if you guys felt this, but the pace some of it felt slow. I was thinking if we were making this today, we wouldn't be dwelling on this or that, or we'd be just cracking through stuff here. It's
Yeah.
just.
Yeah.
But it brought back good memories because I remember really enjoying writing that episode for whatever reason. But some episodes come together relatively easy, and others didn't, and sort of left. I'd be overstating it to say it left a bad taste, but you remember some more fondly than others, and I remember really enjoying writing those that collection of stories. But I think, I guess in general, I was just struck by, maybe it felt a bit slow compared to today's TV. I don't know how you guys felt about it.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned pace because I don't know that I felt it was slow, but something that has just gotten introduced into the kind of the formula of the show is the build team.
Yeah.
Which has just kind of started. And so there is a lot of time focused on building, which I feel like is the thing that you wouldn't see as much of now. That would be a really quick cut, and all of a sudden, now the thing is built. I enjoyed that, but it was really interesting. Do you remember at all if that was kind of a focus of this season of like, hey, we're going to have this build team, let's make them a part of the show? Because it's one thing to have a build team, but to make them characters on the show is kind of a risk, right? Of like, are people gonna like them? Are they gonna be good on camera? What's that gonna be like? It worked perfectly, but it is a big change that we've just seen happen on the show. And I was curious if you had any memories about how that kind of factored into the structure of making the show.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I had sort of forgotten that, but now you mention it, yeah, we did. I remember them saying, if I'm remembering correctly, they were brought on because we were literally, poor Adam and Jamie just couldn't get through there was so much to do. We just needed more hands. And I think those guys, a couple of them might have been sort of in the background anyway, doing stuff from memory. But yeah, I remember a little bit of confusion. I remember sitting here going, so now there are 5 Mythbusters, and like, how do they get equal weighting? How's it all work? And I remember there was a little bit of toing and froing, and it's like, is this too much? Not enough. And but luckily they did become characters in their own right, and I think after the first episode or two that they were in, I think we sort of found that balance. But I do also remember then it was a case of, okay, so the builds are not just quick montage and time lapse and we're done. It's like, let's concentrate more on that because that's where they're at. That's what they're doing,
Yeah.
So it was a little bit difficult, I guess. I was just so used to it just being Adam and Jamie and these guys are the stars, and it was like having to give screen time to the others. It was just striking that balance, I suppose. But luckily, again, it all worked. It was a risk.
Yeah.
And I honestly cannot remember how Discovery felt about it at the time, or whether they were pro or anti. I don't know. But I guess we struck it lucky twice to have all the characters sort of work.
And it's to that point of how well it worked. It's interesting. This is skipping ahead a little bit in our rewatch, but it's only a few episodes after this that the build team have their first myth that's all them.
Yeah.
Like, it's very quickly after this that Adam and Jamie hand the reins over and are like, all right, guys, you're off. And the show kind of like addresses it like, this is how it's always been. Like, these guys are part of the show and are moving on. Like, it worked so quickly in the grand scheme of things, especially after you see the first season. You see the pieces kind of slowly come together across from the pilots to the full episodes. This season, man, it's crazy how quick it's just like, oh, right, they're part of the show. Carrie's funny. Tori's funny. Tori hurts himself. Like, you see those characters all coming out very naturally. And I think we're only a handful of episodes from getting Grant Imahara. And from there, it's like, that's Mythbusters. Like, that's very quick. So it's amazing how fast they caught on to being in front of the camera and to being a part of the show.
And I think, again, this stuff is born of desperation. I could be mistaken. Someone might contradict me on this, but I think, if memory serves, we were at a point where the shows, becoming a victim of its own success, and people want more episodes, and they want more, and it became, well, Jamie and Adam cannot deliver this amount of content by themselves. If you want it, we're going to have to find some other people, and it was literally like, well, this is the only answer. If you want X episodes, we're going to have to split it up and have other characters, have other Mythbusters. So, and I say, that could have backfired, but it worked. Yeah.
One of the really fun things about the Death Ray episode is, of course, Death Ray, as you mentioned earlier, becomes a big myth. It gets retested. It gets retested with Barack Obama at one point in the history of the show. Like, it's crazy how big that myth goes on to be. So I had forgotten that we also get skunk cleaning and bulletproof in the same episode. A question that we've had throughout is, would you guys know going into an episode, like, were those myths shot to be in one episode, or would you shoot stories and then decide in post, time-wise, what fits and what's going to go together?
Those decisions were made by, I believe, the executive producer. So, like, when I got given an episode, It was like, you've got Death Ray and skunk cleaning, and, so someone had already put them together, placed it in front of me. It was like, there you go. And I can't honestly remember whether there was any sort of toing and froing, or whether we swapped stories out between episodes. That could have happened, but I don't think it happened too often with me. It was like, there it is. And again, I'm not sure it was even as conscious as, well, what would work together, or what is there a story that complements the other one? It was literally like, what have we got? What's in the can? What's ready to go? Great, thank you. Away we go.
What's in that pile of tapes?
Yeah. As long as it had that sort of balance between the build team and Adam and Jamie, I think that was the key. You didn't want to have anything not sort of balanced. But the skunk cleaning story, I'd totally forgotten it. It was so funny.
Which is mostly a story about how hard it is to get a skunk to spray, it turns out.
Yeah, I remember that. And I remember when I saw it, I remember being delighted by that. It was just like, that's gold as a writer.
Yeah.
If the skunk had just come in and sprayed them, and it was like, we'd have had half the screen time. Let's face it. Yeah. We needed those skunks to hold fire, because we needed the minutes, So, I get a sense in that story towards the end, and I remember this now, that it's like, come on, we've got to wrap this up. Let's So when they get into the bathroom, they've got Scotty coming in, and I'm thinking, it didn't feel terribly scientific towards the end there. It was like they're throwing beer down, and then they just throw some other cleaning products down or whatever. It's like, dude, shouldn't you respray the bathroom? Like, I'm sitting here 20 years later going, oh, geez, I'm not sure how that stacks up scientifically. But I had the feeling watching it, and I don't know whether I'm remembering correctly or not, but I had that feeling of like, come on, let's get the story over with. We've got to get back to the ancient Death Ray.
Yeah.
Get rid of, come on. It's like,
It also felt like one of those days of shooting where they're like, one of the producers is like, we cannot get a fourth skunk. We are over our skunk budget, and it is just time to be done with this.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know for sure what the budgetary constraints were
for the skunk.
When it came to skunk hire. I don't know what we did a lot of that. But again, it's how it works. So TV, it's all about time. Money as well. But I'm sure there was a point like, how do we've got to wrap this up? Like, we just can't be finding enough skunks. But I also found it interesting because, of course, being Australian, we don't have skunks, and I have no idea. I still have no idea what they smell like. I don't know if you guys have.
Oh, wow!
You keep thinking, is it really that bad? Can it be that bad? Seriously?
It's just super unique. It's super unique, and like it's so overwhelming. It's almost not like a smell. It feels like it's burning your nostrils when it's like right up on you.
It's very biological.
It's not good.
It's very biological. It's one of those things of just like every synapse is firing at once, telling you get away, get away, get away, get away.
Yeah.
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 And it's like, so it's not even the smell. Like if you smelled skunk, oftentimes people compare beer to being skunky, and that is really a disservice because it is not the smell, it is the like physical effect. And you can see that in the episode in the background. They're like opening that synthetic skunk and people are just like keeling over. It's incredibly powerful in the episode.
Wow. Okay. So I'm not missing anything then.
No, I think you're
No.
good. I think you're good.
No,
I mean, you guys have other things in Australia that I wouldn't want to deal with. Some of your wildlife scares me, so maybe I'll take the skunks, but no, you're not missing anything on the skunks.
Yeah, skunks will spray you, but they're not likely to chew your leg off.
Exactly.
As far as we know. Thus far.
Now, that's another myth we can test, perhaps.
Yeah. This summer, Cocaine Skunk coming to a theater near you.
There we go. Sequels are big. Franchises are key.
Yeah. Don't laugh.
You mentioned, the puns and some of some of that stuff that when you watch the show, you cringe a little bit or you recognize. On a broader stroke, from a storytelling standpoint, is there anything you look at on the show and kind of feel your stamp? I know that Andrew Farrell talked about there was a lightness to his way of writing that he still feels in the show of like, yeah, that kind of feels like me. Like I see that in the work that I'm doing now. Is there anything from the show that you feel like maybe you've carried on or you look back and go, oh, I was sharpening that, particular tool back then?
Yeah, I think so. Watching Death Ray, it was definitely me. I feel, I was king of the puns and the alliteration and all that. And that lightness of tone was definitely me. And again, like people like Andrew and Mark Barlin and Martin Ives and Chris Williams, the other fantastic writers came in and just sort of picked up the baton and, put their spin on it. And quite often, it got to a point where there might be the three of us all in, we're all in one building working with our editors, and we call each other in and go, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? It's just like, hey, you think this is funny? And they were a really good gauge. It was like, well, if they're laughing, I've done the job, and that I remember that was great camaraderie there between us all, and a slight sense of competition, I suppose, if I'm honest. It'd be like, oh, yeah, you thought that was funny. Well, get a load of this, it's like,
That's fine.
Yeah, I don't write much. I don't write any different, to be honest, because that's just always been me, and I find I get hired to bring that, whether what I'm doing needs an actual written script or not. I think, I don't think, I've been told. It's like, well, we get you because you will bring that sensibility to the project. And I often get asked to do stuff if stuff is dry and needs humanising or needs a vaguely humorous spin. I get called quite often. So it's nice. But I often have people. I remember back in the day, people would watch an episode of Mythbusting and go, "That was you, Griffo. That had to be you." That line or that alliteration. As soon as I heard the alliteration, I went, "Yep, that's Anthony. That'll have to be him." Friends and family.
Yeah. That's great.
It's wordplay? Yeah. Guilty. Yeah. Sorry.
We had Robert Lee on the show and we asked him about the puns and he was like, he said, for me as a narrator, you get in the booth and you see that you've got that on the page. You're like, well, today's a good day. I can run with this and just have, I'm not going to go too big. That's not really a concern with this material. So I can kind of do anything. As we headed to wrapping things up, I was curious, as you mentioned, it's been 20 years since these Mythbusting days. How often does the show still come up for you, and how do you feel about it all these years later?
It comes up, put it this way, I mean, I've done hundreds of shows, but if someone asks me, what sort of stuff have you done? I always say Mythbusters, because you can guarantee they've heard of it. And the reaction is always, without exception, just like, really? You did Mythbusters? And I find that it's good shorthand.
Yeah.
To say that. And I mean, I'm really thankful, honestly, to have had the chance to work on a show that became so big that, Barack Obama was involved in it. I mean, that doesn't happen a great deal. You'll be surprised to hear. And I find that it was a great opportunity, and I don't think I'll ever work on anything else that had that level of recognition and love and just sheer watchability, and the sort of, as we talked about, that sort of symbiotic relationship with the audience. I don't think I'll ever do anything like that again. I mean, I'd love to think I could, but I just don't think it exists, and it probably never will. So it was just the right time. It was just that magic time in, cable TV, and people were willing to take risks. And, you had cowboys like me sitting back here in an empty room going, oh, well, what do we do with this? Well, let's give this a go. We'll try that. So it's a touchstone for sure. And I mean, as time goes on, I suppose it sort of fades slightly. But as I say, all I've got to do is say I did Mythbusters once, and we're deep in a conversation shortly afterwards.
So as we wrap up, I'm sure our audience would love to know what you're up to these days and where they can find you if you're out there online.
I'm not really online, to be honest, but I've just came off doing a parenting series for the national broadcaster here in Australia. So it's a 5-episode series about basically parenting teens. So it deals a lot with tech, social media. Presented in a funny sort of way, and it's a hybrid between sitcom and doco. So it's sort of
very cool.
A new template. So I oversaw that and wrote a couple of the eps, and hopefully it's just a helper for parents. Having just my kids are now 23 and 19, but we were making the series, and I kept thinking, gee, it would have been good to know that 10 years ago. Just the minefield of kids and tech and, online pornography and all the usual suspects. So I've just come off doing that, and I'm in the process of making a 90-minute special on Australia's foremost rock star guy who you guys wouldn't have heard of, but he was like the wild boy of Australian rock, to people of a certain age, mine included. He was like, he's the go-to man. And so it was, I've just come back from a week spent with him.
That's
luckily
awesome.
He's not quite so wild these days, because I don't think I could survive that. But so
just like hanging out with Adam and Jamie again.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the funny thing was, they came to Australia and did a tour. And so, of course, I ended up meeting them in the flesh and spending some time with them. It was quite surreal, because it was like people I thought I felt like I knew, and I'd never actually met. It was like,
oh, wow.
But, it was great to spend some time with them and sit down and chew over stories and what have you. And, So, that's me. I'm still doing it. Same thing.
Well, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us. We could talk all day. It is a blast to hear about these moments and to get to talk to, as Andrew puts it, the real heroes of Mythbusters on the writing team. We'd love to have you back down the road to talk about more of those episodes and hear more about it. But we can't thank you enough for your time.
Absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks, guys.